Hi, and welcome to English 1302. This is week 10, I think, part 3. I think this is our third or fourth video for this week. I want to kind of go over a few more things about the R3, and then we'll talk a little bit about Robert Frost. First of all, remember, when you turn in to me on Sunday, April the 6th, you're turning in just two pieces of paper. One is an outline, which should be formatted and look exactly like this. The other is a list of your works cited, which should be correctly formatted and look just like this. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, April 6th, that's 10 days away. We've got plenty of time just to do a simple assignment like that. That's true. But let me encourage you, go ahead and get started on it. And if you have time, email it to me as an attachment. That way I can look at it, make any suggestions that are needed, get back to you, and you still have time to fix them and submit it before the deadline. But you got to give me time because my weekends are usually pretty full, and so you got to give me enough time to look at it. And remember, I'll be looking at everyone else's too. Make specific comments on yours and get it back. I've done this several times in the past. The most common comment, so maybe if I give you the comments first, maybe it'll help. The most common comment is too broad. You're trying to cover too much ground. Even the final draft, the R4 project, which is based on the same topic, the same sources, the same thesis and topic sentences as the R3, even that is going to be only about 3.5 pages. So you don't have just a lot of room to develop a lot of different ideas. So you really want to narrow that focus, really like a laser beam, just kind of squeeze in there and really narrow it down to something pretty manageable. Then email it to me when you get that done. And when you're choosing your sources, again, I know I've said this before, but let me repeat it. Use Google Scholar. If you use google.com/scholar, it is an academic search engine which will retrieve only good, solid academic sources, and it will make your job so much easier. Choosing the better sources when they're kind of pre-filtered for you is so much easier than trying to go through like a whole Google search or something like that. There are other academic search engines out there. This is not the only one. RefSeek, Microsoft Academic, Journ, R3. There are several of them out there. But in fact, you can Google for a list of the best academic search engines, and I bet you'll get 15 or 20. But for my money, it's Google Scholar. Then you're going to pick 3, not 4, not 2, not 12, but 3 sources. And remember, books and scholarly journals make the best. You want to avoid blogs, you want to avoid videos, magazines, pamphlets, Wikipedia, anything intended for a mass audience. You're looking for something intended for a fairly narrow audience. And select the ones which are most recent and have the most citations and which really fit your needs the best. But anyway, so you're going to turn in a works cited page that has all 3 listed. Of course, they're alphabetized by the author's last name. And then an outline, which gives me your thesis, and it's labeled thesis. And it's just the main idea. Remember, the main idea has to mention the topic. The topic is whichever aspect of higher education you've narrowed it down to. The example talks about the history of higher education in America. And then the point it's trying to make is it's composed of many important firsts. And as you look at the topic sentences, you notice Harvard was the first college, Dartmouth was the first private college, Joliet was the first community college. It wasn't created as a community college, but evolved to become the first community college. William and Mary created the first law school. Ohio State was the first university, like that. So many important firsts. And notice how repetition of that same phrase not only provides transition, but kind of links ideas together and makes it easier for you as a writer. Okay, I'm sure by now you've had a chance to look over those poems listed under week 10. As you're getting ready to work on week 11, let me remind you that we're looking at Robert Frost, some of his poems. In fact, we're taking 2 weeks to cover him. But before you even read any of his poems, look at that PowerPoint. Notice the interesting aspects of his life, and he did have a pretty interesting life. One thing I want you to key on, one thing I want you to notice and remember, is that unlike most other poets, and unlike any other poet I know of, he he had a full-time job, quit his job, he was a farmer, moved to England, where he became like an overnight success. That just doesn't happen with poets. But now he did know the right people, and he had a lot of help, but his poetry was just that good, so he becomes just like immediately popular and a bestseller. And he moves back to America, buys another farm, and continues to write a lot of poetry. He published book after book after book, goes on speaking tours, becomes guest speakers at different colleges, becomes professors at different colleges. But you also want to look for his themes. These are the main ideas. Now, these are not in all of the poems, or at least not all the poems we're reading this semester, but there's a list of them for you just about in the middle of that PowerPoint called Life and Times of Robert Frost. And those include the limitations and isolation of the individual, difficulty of understanding the existence, death, entropy, and extinction. Entropy is just a scientific term, which means all matter tends to move to the greatest state of chaos. It just means things are falling apart. Youth and the loss of innocence. Nature as a source of wisdom in everyday life. He writes a lot about nature, or rather, he includes nature in a lot of his poetry. He's not like Wordsworth. Wordsworth just writes about nature. Frost uses nature to get his point across. But anyway, look, as you read his poems, be looking for those themes. Yes, some of his poems encapsulate more than one of those themes, but most of them should have at least one, and focus on the main one. So, I'll continue grading your R2 papers, should get them back to you before April 6th, and if you have any questions, please let me know, and I do encourage you to email me the rough draft of your outline and your works cited page far enough in advance of the April 6th deadline that I'll have a chance to look at it, make comments, get it back to you, and you'll still have time to fix it. Or, sorry, make improvements. All right. When you have questions, drop me an email, jfly@southlandscollege.edu. We'll talk some more later.